Despite being a fan of Zelda for most of my life, I've never really made an effort to play through all of the games. I'll pick them up from time to time, play them for a few hours, maybe get really into some of them, but most of the time, I stop playing them after a while. And that's not to say they're bad or boring games, they're great games. Well, most of them are great games anyway, but I've wanted to give more of them a chance for a while. Both to give myself a better perspective on the series as a whole, but also to fully commit myself to the games that I usually overlook. So after finishing the complicated Twilight Princess, I decided to start making videos on the entire Zelda series, starting all the way back with the original Legend of Zelda. And based on what little I knew about it, I wasn't exactly thrilled to be starting with this one. If you know anything about it yourself, I'm sure you can understand why. Zelda 1 is kinda infamous for aging poorly, especially compared to Nintendo's other games of the time. Mainly because of its world traversal, both in how you actually navigate it and by how you uncover certain secrets, which has led to a lot of people saying that Zelda 1 is impossible to play without a guide. And it's this reputation, along with my own, admittedly brief first-hand experience, that stopped me from giving this game a proper chance, which I feel is going to be a similar story for a lot of people. And I was originally planning on making a video taking cheap shots at it before moving on to something I have a little more to say about. That is, until I played it myself. And I mean, yeah, it has aged poorly, that goes without saying, but it holds up better than I expected it to. I doubt anyone else is going to enjoy it as much as I did. I don't think I could actively recommend it, but I mean, I had some kind of fun. Partially from the novelty of playing an early game in a genre, but also just the normal kind of fun. It's definitely intimidating starting out, since the minimap doesn't really tell you a whole lot, and it's not like the old guy at the start gives you a clear idea of where you need to go. But I think that's the point. You don't have a clear idea of where you need to go. You need to go explore the world for yourself and get a lay of the land before you can start tackling the objectives. And even after walking around just the starting area for a few minutes, you start to pick up on certain landmarks. You start to get a sense of where certain areas are relative to everywhere else, and you naturally gain more confidence the more you play, both because Link gets stronger as you clear more dungeons, but also because you actually know where everything is. In a lot of ways, this game feels like a super stripped down version of Breath of the Wild, more specifically the Master Quest mode, which, among other things, turns off the minimap, forcing the player to observe their surroundings to find secrets and navigate the world. Granted, Breath of the Wild has a number of obvious advantages over Zelda 1. It does a better job of guiding the player around its world, and the fact that it isn't completely flat means you can reorientate yourself by looking at landmarks in the distance. But I think Zelda 1 makes up for it by being pretty small, so even though you won't know where you're going at first, it won't take long for you to figure it out, even if you don't end up memorizing every single screen. And even putting that aside, I think this game being as open as it is becomes significantly more impressive when you remember it's on the NES. The only game that I can think of that remotely compares to it is Metroid 1, and Zelda 1 is way better than the first Metroid is. They are kinda designed with different priorities in mind, to be fair, but even just from a readability standpoint, the difference is night and day. Like, look at this area of the map from Zelda 1. Now, I can tell you exactly where on the map this is, partially because I walked here, but if I hadn't walked here, I could tell you that it's in the southwest corner of the big lake in the middle of Hyrule, just a few screens away from levels 1 and 4, and not too far from the starting area. In contrast, look at this area from Metroid 1. Despite the fact I also walked here, the only thing I can tell you about this area is that it's in Norfair. I couldn't tell you where in Norfair, I couldn't tell you how to get out of Norfair from here, but I am assuredly somewhere within Norfair. At least I think. Wait, am I in Kraid's lair? Granted, comparing Metroid 1 to Zelda 1 doesn't necessarily do the latter any favors, mainly with how optional upgrades are handled, and this is probably the biggest sticking point for most people. And I think I can let the footage speak for itself here. A handful of heart containers are hidden behind bombable walls that are impossible to distinguish from any other wall in the game. Oh yeah, also there's a shop hidden under this armos containing a defense upgrade. That's also super important. And yeah, these being hidden in the way that they are is very stupid, especially when put next to Metroid 1, where optional areas containing items are almost always indicated to the player for you to make note of and come back to later. At least I think this always happens anyway. I'm sure I'm forgetting an obvious example, but like, it's been a while since I've properly played Metroid 1. But I also don't think these optional items being hidden in the way that they are is that unforgivable, because even though it is very stupid, let's be honest, how many people have actually completed a Zelda game without looking at a guide? To be fair, needing to pay for the guides probably makes it slightly more stupid and is what more people take issue with. But I don't think gaming magazines would have been that expensive back then, and you could probably learn about this stuff through word of mouth. So I mean, I don't know, I think given the time it came out and how few collectibles are actually hidden like this, I can give it a pass. Honestly, I take more issue with the optional nature of these upgrades. The word optional, of course, having an asterisk the size of the health bar you'll need to beat this game next to it. And that is mainly because of the dungeons. I'll be honest, I've never really been a big fan of 2D Zelda dungeons, because while the 3D dungeons have a good sense of progression as you work to solve cleverly designed puzzles in interesting environments, 2D Zelda dungeons end up boiling down to, okay, push this block, which looks the same as every other block in the room, and there you go, you did it. Maybe I'm being a bit unfair, especially since the later games in the series do have better puzzles than push the block. But for the early games, I struggle to think of a puzzle that doesn't follow this format, aside from maybe the chess piece puzzle from Link's Awakening. Naturally, this means Zelda 1 has a lot of push the block style puzzles as well, and even a few bomb the inconspicuous wall puzzles to add insult to injury. But I also get the feeling that the dungeons in this game specifically aren't focused on the puzzles. They're just self-contained combat arenas with some obstacles connecting them. And it is kinda nice to have an extended period of straightforward monster hunting after exploring the overworld to help break up the pace. But I also think that the dungeons kind of expose the problems that come from this game's open-ended structure. First of all, level 4 doesn't have enough keys to unlock all of its locked doors, meaning you'll need to leave the dungeon to buy more from a shop. This is stupid, especially considering how expensive that very much not optional blue ring is. Secondly, the game lets you enter almost any dungeon, even the final one, as soon as you find the entrance. Great, wonderful, wouldn't have it any other way. The problem is that there isn't much reason to do the dungeons out of order unless you ran out of keys in level 4, since a lot of the enemies from the later dungeons will probably kill you easily if you go to them early, which I don't have much issue with in theory, since it's a pretty natural way of directing the player's movement throughout the world. If you're getting killed by the Lionels of Death Mountain, yeah, maybe don't do that. But the problem I have with the dungeons is that a lot of the time, even progressing through them in a strictly numerical order doesn't leave you that much more prepared than if you just walked into them from the word go. And that is largely because of two culprits, Dark Nuts and Wizrobes. Dark Nuts, much like almost every other enemy in the game, move around at random, but unlike most enemies, they can't be hurt from the front and they hit like a truck. And since there's no way to tell where they're going to move until they've already moved there, a lot of the time you'll end up going in for the kill, only for them to turn around and send you back to the start of the dungeon, which respawns all the enemies, and a lot of the time requires you to clear a room of Dark Nuts all over again. It's annoying. Wizrobes, meanwhile, pelt you with ineffective ranged magic while teleporting around the room. There are usually a lot of them in a room, but they're not that difficult to defeat. So why am I bringing them up? Well, that's because in the footage I was just showing you, I was using the magical shield, an optional item that can be bought in some shops. I didn't buy this during my playthrough since I thought it was for when your default shield got eaten by a like, and subscribe, but apparently this is the shield that can get eaten. So I'm willing to admit I'm an idiot for not buying it, but I do think that this exposes a problem with how this game handles a lot of its upgrades. Because even though they're not on the beaten path, they're not optional. And as the game progresses, they become even less optional. For example, remember how I mentioned earlier that level 4 doesn't have enough keys for its locked doors? Well, level 9 doubles down on that game design paradox by having only 4 keys for its 16 locked doors. If you didn't get the magical key from the previous dungeon, you're required to leave to restock on keys. This is stupid. There's also the fact that I don't know how to beat the final boss. He turns invisible and shoots fireballs at you, and you're sometimes able to hit him if you're lucky. And considering the damage you'll definitely be taking, you're almost required to get the red ring, a second defense upgrade found somewhere in level 9. You can probably beat Ganon without it, but considering the damage I took with it, yeah, I think I'm safe in saying it's basically required. And speaking of the final boss, after beating the game, you have the option to play through the second quest, which rearranges the location of items, shops, and dungeons, as well as making enemies generally more powerful. And I hope you'll all forgive me when I say that I'm not playing it. Don't get me wrong, I did enjoy Zelda 1 despite its faults, but I also think I'm done experiencing those faults for the time being. And I doubt the second quest is going to give me much to make up for them. So I think my time would be better spent on other things. Overall though, Zelda 1 isn't really much more than a novelty that has held up a lot better than a lot of people may think. I appreciate it for almost inventing the action-adventure genre as we know it today, but after playing it for myself and understanding its faults, I think I'd prefer to play one of the sequels. I still recommend at least checking it out and giving it a fair shot for yourself, but unless you're extremely patient, or you're willing to use rewinds to get through some of the more annoying fights, maybe stop once you reach the halfway point. Your sanity is worth more than anything you'd hope to get from beating this game.